Operation Abyss New Tokyo Legacy is a Japanese dungeon crawler RPG developed by Mages Inc. with a near future anime aesthetic. Like most games in the genre, it has obvious wizardry influences. The setting is a high school where your party of students with special powers belongs to a secret organization that fights against monsters. In fact, Operation Abyss is a remake combining two older games, a fact I found out only after finishing the game. The game is divided into two semesters. The first covers Generation X, Code Hazard, and the second is the sequel Generation X, Codebreaker. The game really tried its best to make me hate it, and it certainly has many annoying features, yet I still like it despite its best efforts. Before going into that though, let's have a look at the gameplay. You start off with building a party of 6 members. Well, you do get a default party to play with, but who wants to use them? There are two different graphical styles to choose from, anime style characters and ugly ass characters. The ugly characters do have the feature that their appearance changes depending on what kind of equipment they are wearing or the weapons they wield, but they are hideous. Just look at the bottom of the screen. I went with the static anime models. There are a limited amount of visuals to choose from though, but at least there are different palettes. You also get to choose the voice lines from a fairly large collection of slightly erotic to erotic grunts and groans. The group of 6 characters consists of 2 rows, the front and the back row. Usually, the big and tough guys and gals stand in front while the frail spellcasters hide behind their backs. The classes are mostly your run-of-the-mill RPG professions such as Knight, i.e. tank, warrior, who does what it says on the tin, academic, which is actually more like a thief with tricks and skills for lockpicking and trap disarming, the healer heals, the spellcaster casts spells, archer arches arrows. Since it's a Japanese game, of course, one class is samurai. The most unique class is the Conjurer, or rather Pokemon Master, who can attempt to mind control monsters to fight for her, but you gain access to it halfway into the game only. There are two different modes to the game. There's the city, where you navigate through menus to shop and craft items or visit locations to talk to NPCs like a visual novel. The second part with actual gameplay, which will take up most of the game time, are the first person grid based dungeons. Since it's set in modern day instead of medieval fantasy world, the dungeons or abysses are not caves and dungeons of stone, but sewers, abandoned apartment buildings, or the insides of a subway train. There's even a graveyard and a haunted hospital, or weird sci fi fortresses. The amount of different kinds of dungeons isn't that massive, but Operation Abyss makes good use of them. There are traps and teleport puzzles to force the player to pay attention. Combat happens in traditional JRPG manner, where you are simply walking around when enemies suddenly appear and turn based combat begins. Although there are monster icons littered here and there that also trigger a battle. The characters can attack, defend, use items, spells, or special abilities depending on each individual class, which is customary for most RPGs. The unique twist is that at the beginning of the round you can use a Unity ability, providing you have enough Unity points to employ them. The abilities are special attacks, defensive or offensive buffs, allowing your party to act first in battle, and a surprisingly useful feature is the ability to flee from battle. In most RPGs, that feature would be almost useless, but Operation Abyss can be a bit challenging at times, so fleeing is an option that should not be overlooked. especially since it consumes only a tiny amount of unity score. Players can also leave notes in dungeons to advise other players, like in Dark Souls. Some of them saved a lot of time for me when facing puzzles. One curious detail is that some enemy attacks have rather suggestive descriptions, such as monster tried to pierce Nagatoro's orifices or enter Kirigami's body from any available opening. This is not depicted visually and basically is just a convoluted way of saying the monster attacks. It sounds like something from a hentai anime, which is odd since Operation Abyss doesn't have other such features unless you consider anime girls in swimsuits lewd. Personally, I can't say whether this is a positive or a negative thing. The core gameplay loop is you gain a mission from your superiors at school, go into a dungeon, explore and kill monsters until you go deep enough to complete the said mission, and return to the school for monetary rewards and story exposition. Not terribly unique, but functional. Operation Abyss contains a host of annoyances, some small, others more significant. I will probably forget some, but here's a list. When buying gear at the store, you cannot see the comparison of how much better or worse the new weapon would be to the one a character is currently using. I'd understand the omission if the game was made in 1990, but not from a relatively new game made a decade ago. Your weapons and armor can have different kinds of attributes, such as boosting your strength or spirit, yet the game doesn't show how significant the boost you get to the stat. There's a lot of guesswork involved when it comes to equipment. Your defensive gear have the stats miss chance and evade chance. In the beginning, most of them tend to be 0, yet later on you get armor with miss chance 2 or evade chance -1. Apparently, a negative score is good in both of these, as in the former, a low number lowers your chance to miss, and the latter is applied to enemy when attacking you. I had to do an internet search to figure this out. There are plenty of obscure abbreviations in the game. For example, your weapon might have variant affix INH, FAU, or PAR. Monsters are referred to as variants. Apparently, INH means inhuman, FAU means fauna or beast, and PAR means paranormal, basically ghosts. This is not that clear either, nor is what kind of bonuses you get against monsters if you have the right affix, or what's the difference between an inhuman or fauna. Presumably in the Japanese version these abbreviations are denoted with kanji, which would make it much clearer. The same applies to character classes. For example, samurai is S, warrior is W, but academic is AC and archer is AR. These are not difficult to figure out, but a bit awkward nonetheless. Once again, I presume the Japanese version would be much clearer by using kanji. What the different character attributes do are not always clear. Strength obviously increases physical damage, whereas Whiz does the same for magical attacks for the magician. Spirit improves healing spells for the priest class, yet it's not clear what attributes the academic class or the conjurer need the most. This uncertainty is visible even on online forum discussions. Operation Abyss is not that easy, and while this is mostly a good thing, I do recall a few instances of arbitrary difficulty getting on my nerves. There are several negative status effects to gain, paralysis being one, and the one I hate the most. It stops a character from doing anything unless he is healed by another character, usually by using an item, although eventually the healer learns a spell to heal most negative status effects. Being unable to act is simply annoying, and in one occasion I triggered a paralysis trap, which in turn paralyzed, i.e., wiped out my whole party. I was not amused. In one particular sewer section, I recall encountering a random arrangement of enemies that turned out to be tougher than any boss I'd encountered so far. Later on, there were some challenging bosses, but until that point, the bosses had been beatable on the first try, even if a few made me sweat a bit. I suffered from an issue where the text during a conversation would scroll past at lightning speed, as if the button of my controller was being pressed down, even though I wasn't pressing it. This dialogue skip might be due to an issue with my controller, yet most games work without issue with the same controller. Although another visual novel kind of game has had the same problem. These parts were admittedly more subjective types of annoyances, but annoying nonetheless. The biggest and most troublesome annoyance in the game must have been the level cap. During the first school semester, the level cap for your party is 15. If a character reaches that level, you no longer gain experience for him or her until you reach the second semester in the game. When my party began to hit the cap, I still had a couple of missions to go until level cap extension. I had two choices: either keep going with the same characters despite all the experience points they'd be earning going to waste, or create another party of new characters, the B team. You can basically create as many characters as you want, but only six of them can be in the party at the same time. I chose the latter, although in hindsight I should have just bitten the bullet and let the EXP go to waste. I had a fresh batch of level 1 characters I had to first get up to around level 10 to 12 to deal with the highest level missions available and beat them. After the second semester started and level cap raising to 40, I no longer really used the beat theme though. While playing, I could not fathom why the level cap even was a thing, but after hearing about Operation Abyss being a remake combining two older games, it began to make sense. In the first game, you could presumably only get to level 15. The characters weren't programmed to go higher. In the sequel, though, the ceiling was raised. It makes sense now, but it's still dumb. They should have fixed this annoying feature for Operation Abyss. I'm sure there are still annoyances I forgot, but let's move on to the story. The game starts off with you running around in sewers until a mutant crocodile attacks. A guy in a hoodie tries to help, but he's too weak, so a blonde chick takes care of the monster instead. Then you're taken to the CPA, Code Physics Agency, of the Hinowa Academy High School and given exposition of how the player characters that you will create in a few minutes have special powers tied to their bloodline through something called code rise technology. High school students with these powers are members of the X Squad, or whatever nonsense you rename it as. They use their abilities to fight against monsters called variants in the hazard cases and sprawl terrors, which are normal areas that are mystically transformed into dungeons or labyrinths or where buildings simply vanish. The game treats the X Squad, i.e., the player's party, as a single entity. Story wise, none of the individual members are recognized as having personalities, which is not surprising but unfortunate. It would be fun to see an RPG where, despite all party members being custom made, they would exhibit unique personalities or backgrounds. Civilians are aware of the hazard cases, but not of the existence of the X Squad, and perhaps not of variants either. A lot of the details were left vague in my adult brain. What doesn't make sense is that in the high school, that is your base of operations, there is the secret X section for fighting against monsters, but there are also normal students and teachers that don't know about this secret Batman stuff. Couldn't they just gather together all the special people and people who assist them without any outsiders not to have to sneak around? The code rise stuff is somehow tied to a character's bloodline, although in terms of mechanics, it just determines their character class. Among the illustrious ancestors of the protagonists are Leonardo da Vinci, Florence Nightingale, Jeanne d'Arc, and Moses. For some reason, I find it absolutely hilarious that a party member can be descended from Moses. Wouldn't Operation Abyss technically qualify as a Bible game for the angry video game nerd? Overall, the Code Rise powers are an excuse for having a bunch of teenagers fight against monsters using medieval swords, axes, bows, and magic, instead of having the cops or the military shoot them to smithereens. There are cops, the XPD, that protects civilians from variants, yet they aren't as effective in killing monsters as the teenagers with special blood. It's a bit contrived, but at least there's an excuse. The first mission entails going to an abandoned apartment building, Morimoto High Rise, to eliminate a certain variant. The XPD is already on the scene containing the situation. Deeper inside the dungeonized apartment building, you meet Alice, the blonde chick who saved you in the beginning. Also, you meet a weird monster chick with many eyes who keeps saying, "No, no, no." I guess no does indeed mean no. She gets named No No. At first, No No sends a few bugs to kill you, but you kill them instead. Then she attacks only for you to be bailed out by Alice again. Back at the school, you meet other students like a half Texan comedian Johnny, whose jokes are rendered even more cringy due to getting lost in translation. Tojo, an asshole Peace Cult leader who is the main antagonist for the first half of the game, and Noriko, the head of the student council. Next, you head back to the sewers where everything started. After learning a bit about game mechanics like traps and locked doors, you run into a private detective woman called Miharu and police detective Fuwa, who is constantly smoking a cigarette. I comment the game on this act of bravery as displaying tobacco in popular media seems to be haram nowadays. Miharu is in a restricted area without permission and gets chewed out by the cop. The next mission is to investigate serial killings of teen girls back at Morimoto High Rise. There you run into a couple of women who are part of the Peace Research or TPF cult. They turn into variants and attack. Later, you discover a portal into the Hinowa Abyss, which is a futuristic cyber magic labyrinth realm. The cult has been using the secret portal to mobilize their troops in secret to kidnap girls and do other nasty stuff. However, the higher ups from your clandestine organization, nerd guy Kaito and director Kanzaki, who is Alice's dad, forbid you from delving deeper into the abyss for bureaucratic reasons. Once again, you go back to Morimoto High Rise, this time to protect the G7 summit held next door, although in practice it's just more of the same old variant slaying. The XPD operating in the same building are getting overwhelmed by variants and you have to bail them out. Director Kanzaki gives you top secret background about abysses and code-write technology. Some scientists discovered a dimension called Babel Sphere during World War II. You have to go there to contact the space envoy that resides in an alternate universe and gives CPA guys information. Quite frankly, much of this goes right over my head and possibly even the authors. The Babel is this red technological hellish looking sewer realm. Right as you enter, you run into a mysterious girl in traditional Japanese attire named Masa, who has a creepy black rabbit toy that talks. She doesn't seem all there, as if she's a robot with her personality being unfinished. Then you make contact with Space Envoy, who doesn't say much. After you come back to the real world, you meet Hachi for the first time. She's a cop who gets lost from time to time, and you have to figure out where she is and feed her curry. They're basically side quests that give you a bit of extra money, but honestly, the police force would be better off feeding her to the variants than wasting resources on this retard. You also meet a mysterious Korean chick and the hoodie guy from the intro who tried to help you. His name is Masuaki and he used to be in the X but lost his powers and so now he's a bum or something. At least according to my head canon. There's all sorts of other nonsense with teachers, like lecherous American Mr. Cohen who tries to pick up female TPF cultists. Outside in the park, you meet cult leader Tojo again with the council leader Noriko. He apparently has some hold over her. Tojo discusses his desire to kidnap Alice. Then it's back to the sewers where the plucky teenagers find another portal to the Hinowa Abyss. There you run into Masa with Mula, that creepy black rabbit. Her conversational skills have improved. She informs the party that she wanted to see the outside world. Afterwards, you help Noriko investigate TPF cult. The cult leader supposedly has special mind reading powers, but Noriko suspects he fakes it somehow. You figure out Tojo's psychic powers are just a product of them hacking and stealing people's personal information to manipulate them. Then back in the sewers, you run into Masuaki the hoodie guy and some suspicious scientist guy who seeks variants on you. Next, the detective chick Miharu goes undercover as a schoolgirl to lure the TPF into a trap. Nono appears and Miharu gets abducted while the PCs fight more cultists that turn into variants, very gay ones this time. You chase after them, and as you are prepared to finally fight Nono, she hurls Miharu against your squad and flees. Eventually, something horrible happens. You have to actually attend an exam at school and answer a few questions. Miharu had done some investigating and found out that Noriko had been in an accident previously, ending up in a vegetative state. The hospital she stayed at was the TPF General Hospital, so they must have done something to heal her. You investigate restricted Kagura district, an abandoned slum where you meet the suspicious scientist again whose name is Goldman. He lures Alice into an obvious trap. After a lot of exploration, fighting, and a bit of puzzle solving, you run into Goldman again. He's with Noriko, and dun dun dun! It turns out Noriko was no no all along. The life energy of countless murder victims were used to heal her from the accident and turn her into a monster for the purposes of TPF. You finally fight Nono and kick her ass. After the fight, Detective Fua calls, informing you that Alice has been kidnapped and is in the TPF building. At the headquarters, Kaito tells you that Alice had contacted him. She managed to escape from her captors, but she's below the TPF base in an abyss and has been partially stripped of her code rise abilities. However, Alice's dad, director Kanzaki, claims that for complicated political reasons the X Squad should not enter the TPF building until his excuses are counterspelled by his grandfather Mifune, head of the Mifune Corps. Finally, you get on your way and Masa appears to warn about evil spirits or something. After killing variants in an abyss, you find a portal to TPF Kingdom, the cult's headquarters. There are a few puzzles to solve before facing the bosses. First, you have to stomp Nono again, then face off against Goldman, who transforms into a dragon with cannons straight out of Digimon. He fires a codebreaker attack to take away your powers, but Nono jumps in the way. After the dragon is beaten, an edgy guy, X-Wizard, appears. He belongs to some lame group called Wiz Agency. He finishes off Goldman and says TPF is over. There's gonna be a new group of bad guys from now on. Alice beats up Tojo and arrests him. International organizations and politicians had been protecting TPF previously, but no longer. Nono turns back to Noriko and is bleeding, barely alive. She's taken to the med lab. The CPA needed to know more about Wiz agency, so it was time to return to Kagura district slums. Unfortunately, at this point, the party members were starting to hit max level, and decision was made to make a B team not to waste experience points. So there was a lot of grinding and leveling. Eventually, though, the B team was strong enough to take on X Wizard. After the fight, he invites you to join Wiz agency. Your superiors figure out X-Wizard is Kaito's long-lost brother Akito, who was thought dead or kidnapped by the TPF. Then Alice and Kaito enlist you on a secret mission to figure out more about code technology, Babel Sphere, and Abyss Dimensions. The higher-ups surely know something they're not telling, or perhaps the game developers don't really know either. Kaito hacks into the mainframe and finds out about military organization Agency 9 back at World War II, headed by Professor Tenmei Muramasa. Alice's great grandfather and Tojo's ancestors had something to do with it as well. Little is known about this Professor Muramasa except he disappeared inside Babel in 1945. A message arrives stating something happened to Space Envoy in the Babel, so you have to go have a look. Masa offers some useful advice as you get there. You defeat some gatekeeper chest dildos to open the way further. After that, the annoying level cap is finally lifted and the game proceeds to the second semester. During that time, Alice has disappeared and the government had sent a bureaucrat to oversee the X's activities. For me, the B team was shelved and A team took over again, with the addition of a transfer student in the newly unlocked Conjurer or Pokemon Trainer class. Next up, you go to a haunted hospital to investigate some sprawl terror stuff. You encounter another member of Wiz Agency, a female called Z Wizard. She shit talks you that you should quit X, but does not attack. When you get back to the school, you meet the government bureaucrat Shintaro, sent to mess with the CPA. You can tell just by his looks that he's all on the up and up and certainly not a scumbag. He's going to investigate Alice's disappearance and he has to approve any CPA activities beforehand. But he promises he won't meddle in your affairs. At least Noriko has recovered from being a monster and almost dying, and now she helps out with the X stuff. Later on, the bureaucrat explains that black suited people have been appearing around town. They're foreign agents. There seems to be a spy at Hinova Academy. You investigate with the help of Noriko by asking around town. You run into a man and woman in black in the sewers along with Masuaki. The blackies are threatening the hoodie guy. Two men in black turn into wizards. After kicking their asses, the woman in black flees with Masuaki behind her. Back above the surface, the bureaucrat suspects Masuaki is the spy. Then you have to go back to Morimoto High Rise, where the layout has changed to recover some police robots that have gone haywire. You run into Z Wizard again and dun dun dun! Discover she was Alice all along. Then you meet a blonde woman, Carol, who turns out to be her mom and High Inquisitor of the Wiz Agency. But she was supposed to be dead? Alice uses Codebreaker on the party, causing them to lose all levels and abilities. Back at the school, the bureaucrat wants to arrest you, wipe your memories, and shut down the X. Wow, this heel turn sure came out of no was telegraphed from a mile away. He's already arrested Director Kanzaki and Kaito. Suddenly, however, Kaito creates a distraction The auto destruct sequence has 60 seconds left and he tells you to run. The cops almost catch you in the hallway, but Johnny and Professor Cohen slow them down, allowing you to escape. You head to the subway where you have to fight XPD robots with the help of Masuaki. Now you're nigh useless without any powers or weapons. As you're getting overwhelmed by robots, Masuaki helps you out by blowing himself up. RIP. Eventually, you reach the secret base where the others are already. The ones that got arrested were clones. It seems obvious bureaucrat Shintaro is working for the Wiz agency. Once you get your powers back, you get back to investigating the spy. Miharu claims Johnny, the half Texan, has been meeting with the guys in black. He seems to be it. The search leads you to the haunted hospital. You have to get to the basement floor, but the elevator isn't working, so you have to play hide and seek with a ghost for him to restore electricity. You discover Johnny with persons in black down in the basement. They were using him, but now that his cover was blown, he's become useless. The reason Johnny was helping them was that they were threatening his parents in the US. After a bit of complimentary combat with Whiz Kids, you bring him to their secret HQ. Johnny explains he was helping the bad guys because they helped him with his student exchange stipend. Next up is the International Cemetery with Catgirl since bureaucrat Shintaro had been spotted there. Your job is to figure out what's the deal with him. My favorite enemies are there, the tanks, as well as the Statue of Liberty. Some remnants of the TPF also lurk there. After solving a puzzle with pressure plates, you unlock your way to the catacombs. Down there you discover a coffin with the corpse of Pencil Neck Shintaro. What vampiric trickery is this? Apparently the Shintaro you'd met was a clone, whereas the real one is dead. The CPA people begin formulating a strategy to expose the fake bureaucrat. Then you get another call from the space envoy. You go back to Babel Sphere to investigate something ripped out of Star Trek called Space-Time Wave Point. Space Envoy explains intruders have intruded her domain. It's the Wiz agency. Having eradicated them, Space Envoy opens a gate deeper into the Babel, where you meet Carol, Alice's mom. She mentions something called Project Yhal and complains about her husband Kanzaki. She sends her goons to fight you instead of doing it herself. After combat, you meet Masa again. She's lost her bunny. Back at the hidden bunker, while conversing with the director and Kaito, Masa suddenly teleports in, although only as a projection. She reveals her father is Tenmei Muramasa, the scientist that disappeared after World War II. Masa wants to see the outside world, so you'll escort her. The CPA guys plan to expose the bureaucrats' clonic nature to the rest of the world. He's gonna be in some opening ceremony, so you have to go to a subway train with lots of teleporting to kick some whiz ass. Ex-Wizard or Kaito's brother is there and he clones himself as well. You kick double ass and then Alice appears. She grills her dad why didn't he tell her the mom was alive. Director Kanzaki says he thought she was dead but admitted he never saw her die. Johnny is part of the operation against Shintaro as well and in trouble, so you hurry to another part of the train. You fight a bunch of fat ass maidens, one of which is the true form of Shintaro's clone. The variant form was broadcast publicly, although you don't get to see it, so the X is reinstated and no longer have to flee from the authorities. Unfortunately, the CPA headquarters had been blown up during the escape. However, Masa shows up and using her dad's Babel powers of area rise, the old headquarters is magically rebuilt, including a new weapons lab. The X Squad almost has to attend another school lecture, however, you get to be excused due to an emergency situation. The Korean chick Taehyun from the school was spotted near the cemetery, so back to the zombies and tanks you go. You meet a bunch of TPF cultists, Professor Cohen is among them, and they turn into variants since they need an ass whooping. The Korean was presumably kidnapped by the cult as she is nowhere to be seen. Apparently, her sister had some involvement with the cult too. The next day, you go back to the cemetery and down into catacombs to meet more persons in black. Suddenly, there's a warning on your futuristic phone thingies, and unknown purple energy spheres appear and make the enemies disappear. Soon the spheres vanish too. It's a new phenomenon that makes Kaito excited. Eventually, though, investigation into the cemetery gets cancelled for political reasons. UA, basically America, pressured the Japanese government to shut it down. The Whiz kids don't want you snooping around. Whiz agents have been spotted near the Sakura TV station. You have to participate in a quiz show to investigate and kick some trivia ass. There's also an idol contest going on next door. Alas, you could not join. The Whiz guys indeed seem to have a secret portal at the station. The Korean chick is back at the school, though she's defending the TPF. You return to the sewers to look for TPF cultists. Professor Cohen is there and turns into a variant too. After some whoop-ass, the cops come and arrest Cohen. The investigation leads into an underground watery area with Leviathan. You have to find it and battle it several times until it's dead, since it's hiding underwater. Once again, you head to Morimoto High Rise to fight Soul Eater along with those purple spheres called Code Erasers. After that is done, Director Kanzaki finds an old picture of Alice in the secret bunker. He explains how the UA military industrial complex formed the Wiz agency. Then his wife Carol shows up. She offers to return Alice in exchange for information about Professor Tenmei Muramasa. Kansaki refuses. Carol mentions something called Akashic in relation to Alice, and it's not the Akashic record. Next, you head to Kagura District slums to find more info about the Wizzies. Alice is there. She says the ex justice is not true justice and gets triggered. Code erasers spawn everywhere. You lose your powers again. Carol arrives to flaunt until Masa counters it. Back at the school, the people who talk instead of fighting keep discussing the significance of Project Whitehall. It's time to return to the catacombs despite not having the permission to do so. You encounter a creepy skull boss down there. You have to enter heaven and hell chambers to disable its special ability to make sure it stays dead. Eventually, you'll reach Carol again in an abyss who tells a story about area rise technology and a little girl who raised a town out of nowhere. So the Wiz agency is searching for the goddess of reproduction. In other words, she's a naughty bad guy with a crazy vision slash scheme. You discover a portal between the Abyss and Sakura TV. Masa shows up and suddenly disappears in a flash of light. Director Kanzaki says that since Masa has disappeared, the Wiz agency plans to invade Babel. You head there to find that the old graphical artist of Operation Abyss has been fired and replaced with an inferior one in this image of Carol holding Masa hostage. You try to save her, but Alice appears and uses Codebreaker. However, Noriko intervenes, taking the blast herself and protecting you. Alice begins abusing Noriko, but Kaito's brother Akito shows up and white knights for Noriko, turning on the Whiz kids. Carol tells her underlings to retreat to the beanstalk, Masa in tow, whatever that is. Afterwards, back in the real world, Alice meets the party to tell them the way to the bad guy's secret lair, the Geomatrix. In the classroom, Director Kanzaki notes how Carol suggested that Alice has potential for awakening to Akashic, which would be bad news, probably. It possesses the code containing the origin of life and must not be awakened. Even Kanzagi's badass grandfather is afraid of it. Next up, you infiltrate the Geomatrix, the enemy fortress, as soon as you find the entrance in the Sakura TV building and answer a science question correctly. I got it right on the third try. Pretty good, right? The Geomatrix is a tough and long dungeon. As you enter, Masa does her Princess Leia impression asking for help via hologram. After fighting tanks in narrow corridors, you find Carol, Masa, and Alice. However, Carol reveals her true form. She's actually some bitch called Patricia. The real Carol was dead all along. Director Kanzagi gets injured dramatically, but not dramatically enough to die. Alice goes nuts, and Akashic in her Super Saiyan mode. Her great grandfather comes to contain her powers, but you still have to kick her ass. Once that is done, the great grandpa dies. Deep in the bowels of the geomatrix, you find a portal to the beanstalk that is some sort of energy elevator that takes you to the orbit. Project Yhal is a satellite god or will bring about god or something like that. You fight Patricia in a huge ass mech. When you beat her, she actually dies and the satellite starts to plummet to the ground. Masa, however, saves the party with her magic. The end? Yes and no. You get to see the end credits, but after that there is still some mega tower dungeon to go through where Tokyo Tower used to be, if you wanna grind your characters to level 99. I didn't, although there are still some missions to do as well, so it's possible there is still some story content there. For example, the Korean chick's story arc isn't finished yet. Alas, I don't have the time for that. The story overall is decent enough, but not too exciting. If Operation Abyss was an anime instead of a game, I'd say it was mediocre. Watchable but not great. Since it's a game, I'd give the story a passable grade. Long before the story section, I complained about the annoying flaws, yet I've claimed to like Operation Abyss. What are the good parts then? Let's start with a few generic facts first. The setting and overall aesthetic work. The story takes place in modern Japan with a few science fiction and supernatural elements, which sets it apart from your run of the mill fantasy RPGs. Visually, also, the game looks nice if you're into anime and such. The juxtaposition between gameplay and story scenes work well. Despite the same dungeons getting reused several times, the various missions that send you to those dungeons make the ordeals seem fresh. There's no ludonarrative dissonance in this sense. Different dungeons also have their own unique feel visually and in the kind of challenges they offer. What doesn't quite mesh so well, where there is a kind of dissonance, is in the personal aspect of the story versus the larger narrative. What this means is that there are missions where you investigate the kidnappings of schoolgirls and discover many of them having been murdered for unusually nefarious reasons. While delving into dungeons and sewers, you occasionally stumble upon the corpses of unfortunate people. The world is presented as brutal and violent, yet the characters you interact with personally tend to be spared that brutality. Certainly, some of them get injured and suffer at times, but a few of them actually end up dead or permanently harmed. The anime optimism protected by plot armor of the NPCs doesn't quite fit the dark nature of the rest of the world. The RPG gameplay of Operation Abyss is decent. It doesn't stand out as exceptional in comparison to other dungeon crawlers, but that's not really a bad thing. It's a functional RPG where exploring, leveling up, fighting, and discovering is as fun as it usually is in games of the genre. There is a degree of difficulty in the game that generates an aura of dread when delving into dungeons. It adds tension and a sense of danger to the game. Also, you cannot save while inside a dungeon unless you use a consumable item. Normally, I don't like this kind of mechanic, but since you can save whenever at the school, this kind of works. The game did crash on me a couple of times, but thankfully it always did so while at the academy and not within a dungeon after an hour long session. Personally, I found Operation Abyss a kind of a hidden gem. Although I do understand why the review score on Steam is mixed. There's a lot to dislike in the game, but personally I was able to overlook most of the things that made me pull out my hair. Operation Abyss has personality. That personality isn't always the most pleasant one to deal with, but compared to a lot of corporate slop in the market, it stands out.